I'm your host, Laura Berry, and welcome to Out of the Box, an interview series about the abusive practice of solitary confinement. For the next 7 weeks, you will be hearing some very personal and heartfelt stories of survivors of solitary confinement, family members of those in solitary, and experts working to change the narrative of how solitary is used. These stories are all very personal to me. After being imprisoned as a child and personally spending 11,962 days in prison, some of which was spent in solitary while pregnant from a sexual assault by a correctional officer, I know the horror of solitary confinement all too well. I have no doubt that you will be moved by these stories as well. So, without further ado, let's get started. Thank you, Nancy, for joining me today. Could you take just a second and tell me and the listeners who you are?
Well, I'm an Arkansan by now. I've been here for about 35 years and always interested in social justice issues and felt a need to be involved with something locally. So chose Decarcerate a few years ago, and I went to a meeting and learned that one of their Decarcerate's campaigns is to end solitary confinement. So that's how I got involved. I worked at UAMS for about 13 years and earned an MPH there prior to that, and retired a few years ago.
Well, I appreciate you taking the time today to talk to me. Could you briefly tell how you became in solitary campaign and the writing of this report?
Well, yeah, like I had read about solitary confinement. I knew vaguely what it was. And then when I attended that meeting a couple of years ago, I signed up to be part of the campaign because it just seemed to me that it was an inhumane thing to do to anybody. And have, it didn't seem like it was going to serve a purpose. It was just going to hurt people. You know, I raised a child. I can't imagine locking my child up in a closet for misbehavior. I don't care how bad the deed. You just know that that's not going to work as a punishment, and it's just a basically cruel thing to do, which is what experts say. You do that for so many days in a row to somebody, and it's torture. So I decided I wanted to try to be part of it, and I like pulling data together and writing about data. So I thought maybe I could do this. So.
Well, I appreciate all the work that you put in. Can you give a brief summary of what you learned about solitary confinement in the Arkansas Department of Corrections?
Yeah, and real quick, if I could, Laura, I'd like to just fill in for people who don't really know a lot about solitary itself, which was part of the research I did, which is yes, I learned that it does indeed research. There's tons of research and accounts of what happens to people. It creates mental illness in people who've never been mentally ill before, and the effects can be lasting. It can lead to disciplinary, and if you're mentally ill, it can lead to disciplinary problems that are more likely to throw you in solitary. So it becomes a vicious cycle. It doesn't really make prisons safer. The research is available on that. Doesn't really help keep people safe for even the people who are incarcerated or the people who work there. It costs a whole lot of money, 3 to 4 times more expensive to run a solitary cell unit than regular prison housing. It can be a threat to public safety when people experience a long time in solitary and then they're released directly to the public, which happens frequently, including in Arkansas. Those people have had no time to adjust. They're angry, they're traumatized, and it can lead to greater commission of felonies, violent crimes, and return to prison. So it does not seem like a very good thing to do to people. And there are other states are finding a lot of finding ways to manage prisons without resorting to such a inhumane and really pretty ineffective practice. So as far as Arkansas goes, I learned a lot. I never was able to step foot in a prison because of the pandemic, but there was a lot of data straight from the Arkansas Department of Corrections available. And that is what that section of the report is based on, is data from the Arkansas Department of Corrections. And we also, thanks to Laura connected me with people who'd been in prison before that I could interview who'd experienced solitary, and that's included in the report. But the bulk of and that's very eye-opening from a personal standpoint, but the data that's in there is Arkansas Department of Corrections data. And what it shows is that, well, for example, Arkansas has the highest rate of use, the highest percentage of people in solitary at a given moment of time, according to a national survey that's been done over the years, over the last decade, starting about 9 years ago. And Arkansas has gotten worse in its rate of use compared to many other states who've practically eliminated or greatly reduced their reliance on solitary. So that's one big thing I found out. I found out that the Department of Corrections doesn't recognize how many people likely have serious mental illness in the prisons. And this is a big deal, not only for people who are going to go back to their communities someday, and that's about 9 out of 10 people who spend time in prison in Arkansas will return to their community. So the question is, are people getting better and more able to function as productive citizens while they're in prison, or are they getting worse? And one of those big issues is mental illness. And when mental illness goes unaddressed, as you can well imagine in a prison environment, you're going to have a more likely somebody who's pretty mentally unhealthy when they return. And if they spent time in solitary confinement on top of that, that's a serious thing. And okay, about 11% of the general population in the United States adults are recognized to have a diagnosis of serious mental illness. 11%. Those are people not in prison. Well, the Arkansas Department of Correction contends that only 2% of all the people in Arkansas prisons have serious mental illness. Now, that seems improbable when you think about it. And then on top of that, the Bureau of Justice statisticians maintain that they have found that about 49% of people in state prisons, when they did a survey, were reporting having experienced symptoms of serious mental illness in the last 30 days. So there's a lot more people in prisons who are seriously mentally ill. And if they're ignoring that problem that they've got, then number one, they're putting people in solitary with mental illness, which they say they're not doing. But if they don't recognize the fact that people are seriously mentally ill, then their odds are some of those people are acting out, they're disturbed, they're going in solitary. And then also, too, people just in the prisons are not getting the mental health care they need. And that's very, very sad. So those were, to me, two of the big issues. And I don't know if you wanted to ask anything in particular about that. I can just continue to talk on that issue for a while, but.
Well, actually, I think you've answered most of my questions, but in your opinion, how can we change the current traumas caused from solitary?
Well, first of all, of course, not to impose it on people. The number one thing is to prevent it. I mean, if somebody's routinely, like they're just doing stuff all the time that's disruptive to the prisons. A lot of times what happens is people are being disruptive, number one, and they're really not being a threat. They're just being a pain to somebody who's trying to run things. That's their job. And so they're throwing people in prison, in solitary with really not a really good reason to do. It's just used broadly as a tool for prison management. So that's one thing, is there needs to be a look at the policies and procedures Yes, there are these series of reviews that's written in their policy, but apparently a lot of people are getting put in there, and they're nonetheless, and there's nothing in their policy that says nobody can stay in there longer than X number of days. It's open ended, and it can be reviewed at a given period of time. That's and just it just can go on and on, and somebody can just be in there indefinitely. And that's what the national surveys have found. There are people that have been in solitary for years in Arkansas prisons. So there needs to be a serious, impartial look by some outside experts. And really the number one thing they could do that's available to them is they could link up. When I say they, the Arkansas Department of Corrections could seek out expert guidance and assistance, say from the Vera Institute of Justice and perhaps maybe from the Bureau of Justice. I think things like this have been offered. They come in and they help a jurisdiction, a correctional system, look at their policies and procedures, figure out how they can reduce a reliance on solitary. It's been done in other states successfully, and it could certainly be done in Arkansas. It's been done in Louisiana, for example. And I forget a number of other states that have sought the support from Vera Institute, and that would be a big step forward. They could publish more data. They really need to disclose how long people are actually being held in there, because it's a little hard to get data on that. The data we do have, they did supply to a national survey, which was done by the Association of State Correctional leaders and the Lyman Center for Public Interest Law at Yale, they've been doing those surveys for a number of years together. So, but we need to be able to publicize that and bring that to people's attention, because there are people that are being held in there for a long period of time, and it's really cruel and harmful to people. They could take a look at their prison culture. I just want to say that too, because that's really at the root of it a lot of times is really what is your philosophy about what are prisons supposed to do? Yes, taking away someone's freedom is punishment, but does that mean that that's what they're supposed to experience day in and day out, every minute while they're in there? It's just find more ways to load it on top of people? Or are we trying to help people find a path to a better life and a better self, you might argue? So what are the prisons doing to either foster that or really add to the misery and dysfunction? That's something they need to come to terms with.
Well, I found that nearly 1 in 5 adults in the United States have a mental health illness, which is a total of 51.5 million just in 2019. And out of that number, there are over 80,000 people in the United States right now in solitary confinement. So I appreciate everything you put into our report, and most definitely for giving us this interview and sharing your information with everybody so that they could get a better understanding of where the report came from. And I appreciate you taking the time today to share all that with us.
Well, thank you, Laura, for doing the interview. I'm glad to have the opportunity and very grateful to have been entrusted to do the report, because it's an important issue for Arkansas. So thank you.
Thank you. Mm-hmm. I can't help but believe that after hearing the story today, you're motivated to join us in this fight. Here are a few ways to get involved. Read our report about solitary confinement on Dockter's website. Follow us online over the next several weeks. We'll be posting lots of content about solitary confinement on our Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram pages. Donate to the campaign. It's only through the financial contributions of supporters like you that we're able to continue this work. And finally, send us an email to join our monthly In Solitary meetings, where you can learn how to volunteer with us and help us strategize our work. Again, thank you.